Edward and Jane worked together at the factory, and that is where they met. At first, there were simple dates, and then he proposed marriage. The girl was thinking for a long time. She consulted her mother. "What do you think? He is a nice guy. He earns a lot of money. Why not marry him?" The woman did not understand. "I do not know. I do not feel that he loves me," said Jane. "Nothing you will feel. You know that men are like that. He loves you, but he'll never say so." Her mother knew what she was saying. Her husband, Jane's father, was just like that. And Jane gave in to Edward and her mother's persuasion and said yes to the marriage proposal. The wedding was played in a restaurant. Edward wanted nothing bad to be said about their celebration in town. Of course, all of the guests had too much to drink, but there were no fights. The family lived in the city, and outside of the city, after a few years of living together, decided to build a house. The building materials were bought gradually. That is why the construction lasted a long time. "Why don't we take a loan and get it done quickly?" Edward suggested one day. "Well, if we can afford it, why not?" His wife supported him. So they did, and 6 months later, they already had the walls of their future home. Of course, they were not planning to live in it yet, just for recreation. Edward continued to build, and when the house was ready, Jane began to decorate the inside. She did everything with such dedication that it was possible only to admire. She put up wallpaper, ordered a kitchen to match the color. There was a soft little carpet on the floor and a cozy chair. Every detail was worked out by Jane. She did not forget anything. "Let's go home. Tomorrow morning to work." Her husband called her, but she wanted to finish what she had started earlier. "Now, just a few more minutes," she pleaded. The work continued. The couple wanted children, but it just wasn't working out. Jane had been pregnant a couple of times, but it had all ended in abortions. She suffered. She didn't tell anyone about it. She never felt love from her husband, so they lived together. When the house was ready, they invited friends and relatives for a housewarming party. The owners were happy that everyone liked their construction. "Jane, how well you did it here," the friends said. She only blushed. "Are we always going to meet here from now on?" Edward's friends asked. He shrugged his shoulders. The friends congratulated, celebrated, and praised the hosts. The party was over and everyone went home. Edward and Jane often went to the cottage, as they had come to call their home. In the summer, Jane planted flowers there, and Edward kept pounding and making things. "Edward!" She ran happily toward him. "What is it? What's the matter?" He could not understand. "I'm expecting a baby. The 3rd month," she told her husband at the beginning of the fall. He said, spitting so as not to jinx it. Yes, I did the same," she cried, wondering if it would work out this time. Before Christmas, it was decided that the holiday would be celebrated at the cottage. They invited friends. Jane was happy. Her tummy was already rounded. The parents-to-be were congratulated. There was a lot of noise. They opened champagne, made wishes, set off fireworks. In the morning, the guests parted and the host went to bed. In the middle of the night, there was an explosion in the village where Jane and Edward's house was. Jane was thrown on the bed, banging hard against the wall. The house was on fire. "Edward!" She crawled across the floor, her eyes obscured by acrid smoke. She heard her husband groaning somewhere. Advice on how to behave during a fire began to pop in her head. "We have to get a wet rag somewhere," she whispered while she crawled on. Jane managed to get up. She somehow made it to the kitchen. She could barely see the fire. There was black smoke everywhere. The woman grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on, wetting it in a bucket that was standing right there. She thought she was scrubbing the floor with it, but it didn't matter. Jane lay down on the floor. There was less smoke and crawled toward the bathroom. She saw Edward lying there. "Edward, answer me!" She crawled toward her husband. His eyes were closed and he was breathing heavily. Jane heard a pounding outside, thinking it was the firemen and the neighbors. She threw a wet rag over her husband's face and tried to pick him up. Just as she did so, she heard glass break, at which point the flames hit her right in the face. Jane remembered nothing else. She woke up in her room. Her whole body ached. "What's with my baby?" was the first question. "Jane, you lost him. If you had been saved right away, nothing would have happened." The young doctor looked at her. Tears streamed from her eyes. He wanted to wipe them away. But her hand felt the bandages. "What's happened to me?" She gazed up at the man. "It will pass." He took her hand. "And where is my husband?" She asked him numerous questions. "He must be at home. He got smoke inhalation, but thanks to you, Edward is alive," said the doctor and left the room. Jane cried. The next day, Edward came in. He sat next to the bed and was silent. He just didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," his wife said. "I'm sorry." He didn't look in her direction. A month went by. Jane was discharged. She could already see her disfigured face. Could not look in the mirror. She came home and Edward wasn't there. Had he left me? How could he? Jane didn't understand. Her mother calmed her down as best she could, but the woman could not come to her senses about what had happened. In the evening, she dialed her husband's number. "I'm sorry, of course, but you lost our baby," he said. "But I saved you," Jane cried. "You know I was only thinking of how to save you." "I understand everything, but I decided that I want a real family. I want a child." "So let's try again. Is it just about that? Or is it about the face? Are you embarrassed of me now?" "Jane, nobody wants you like this right now, and neither do I." He hung up. Jane cried. She couldn't understand how someone with whom she had lived for years could betray her like that. She wanted to go to the bathroom, lie down, and never get up again. But Jane felt sorry for her mother. The woman was pounding the doorsteps of the hospital at that moment. She asked for rehab for her daughter, and she got her way. Jane was sent to one of the best rehabilitation centers. There, the room per night cost more than Jane's salary. She loves everything about the center, especially the fact that there is a large park for walks. She liked to go to the lake in the morning, sit on a bench and watch the sunrise. "Jane?" She heard her next to her. "Yes." She turned and recognized Thomas. "Hey, what are you doing here? I thought I'd never see you again." He sat down closer. Jane turned away. She didn't want him to see this. Thomas had worked in the factory as a courier, and they'd known each other ever since. "You have to understand. Rehabilitation." She pointed to her face. "Well, yes, I understand. But it can't be fixed. We don't live in the Middle Ages." "I don't have that kind of money. It was a miracle I got here, thanks to my mom." "Do you know what you've done to my life?" He looked at her fondly. "No," Jane wondered. "Then I saw you at the factory and fell in love with you. But you were with Edward. I didn't get in the way. I quit. I thought I'd make it. I'd be rich, and you'd change your mind and come with me." The man grinned. "I'm not all that happy." She told him everything that happened. The next day, the attending physician came into the room. "Jane, everything is ready for the operation. We are waiting only for you," he said. "What kind of surgery?" She did not understand. "How? You were sent for free. Plastic surgery included." The doctor was surprised that she does not know. "Okay." She stood up uncertainly and followed him. A month later, Jane was walking out of the gate of the center, beautiful and blooming. She saw Thomas, who was standing outside an expensive car. "Will you marry me?" He held out the ring. "It's you!" Jane guessed. "What difference does it make now?" He waited for an answer. "I agree, but I need time." She took the ring and cried. "I understand that you have to think and decide, but I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." He hugged the woman. One day, Edward was on his way to get bread. After the fire, he began to have health problems. He had to quit his job, lived with his mother. He saw a car stop outside a jewelry store. A man came out and opened the car door, from which a woman and a small child came out. Edward recognized Jane. For a moment, he couldn't believe his eyes. Edward quickly stepped closer, searching her face for the ugly signs of the incident, but no luck. Jane's skin was perfect. The woman was dressed expensively and tastefully. It immediately gave the impression that Jane's life was going well. She smiled at the man who took the child in his arms, and they went into the store, discussed something cheerfully. Edward spat on the ground in anger, turned around, and walked away.